Hello everybody. The following PowerPoint presentation was created with the purpose of answering specific questions that some students asked in the Facebook group. This information will serve as a kind of review for you to be ready for the midterm exam. As you can see, the topic of the presentation is intransitive versus stative verbs. The first question that was posted in the Facebook group was, what is the difference between transitive and stative verbs? First of all, let us see what an intransitive verb is. I know that this is something that we have already discussed before. It is a topic that you have discussed not only in English grammar classes, but also in other English classes. But as I mentioned, this is a kind of review to clarify any doubt that you may have. Let us start with intransitive verbs. Remember that intransitive verbs are those ones that never take an object. This means that you do not need any direct or indirect object. Instead of that, you can use any other kind of complement, like for example, adverbs or adverbial phrases. I need to insist, in order to leave it clear, that you do not need an object for the sentence have sense. Let us see some examples of sentences using intransitive verbs with a complement and without any complement. The first one is, the kids smiled. In this sentence, as you can see, you do not need anything else in order to have sense or a complete idea. Of course, as I already mentioned, you can add an adverb or an adverbial phrase if you want to give further information about the way in which the kids smiled. But it is not necessary. With this information is enough. What about the second example we have in the slide? It reads as follows. The president arrived to the country. In that sentence, you can see that you have the prepositional phrase to the country. You can definitely say just the president arrived, and that is no problem. The idea has sense. However, with the prepositional phrase, you are answering the question where. In other words, it is a prepositional phrase functioning as an adverbial phrase because it is answering the question where. Later, in further slides, I am going to show you the functions of prepositional phrases. Indeed, that was another question that was posted in the Facebook group. Let us analyze the third example. Our success results from our cooperation as a team. After the intransitive verb results, we have a prepositional phrase from our cooperation as. These sentences teach us that after an intransitive verb, we can have an adverb or an adverbial phrase, but never an object. You need to keep in mind that adverbial phrases are made of prepositional phrases. Now that we have cleared what an intransitive verb is, we are going to analyze what a stative verb is. In few words, I can say that these verbs are the opposite of intransitive verbs. Because transitive verbs, as in transitive verbs, denote the dynamic. That means action, since they are in the subcategory of action verbs. On the contrary, stative verbs indicate, as the same word implies, a state. And there are different types of states that we will see later. This means stative verbs are not denoting continuity or an ongoing action. In other words, you cannot use stative verbs in the progressive form, like, for example, present perfect continuous, past continuous, among others. In the next slide, you will see the different states of stative verbs. Can they indicate? They can indicate a state of being, a sensory state. This one has to do with the senses. Cognitive state, that is giving the idea of making a mental process. Possessive state, and measurement state. Let us see some examples. The first one is, they seem happy. The word happy in the sentence is an adjective giving further information about the subject. They look happy. The second sentence is, the food tastes delicious. The word delicious is an adjective that is giving further information about the food. As you can see in the slide, normally, what you can have in a complement is information that it is referring back to the subject. What about the next sentence? The candies belong to the kids. After the stative verb belong, you have a prepositional phrase. That sentence is showing possession. Nevertheless, as in any other language, you will find exceptions. Some examples can be intransitive verbs functioning as transitive verbs. In the case of stative verbs, there are some exceptions too. There are some intransitive ones that take objects and the sentence has sense. You can look for a list of those in internet. What about stative verbs? Do we have any exception? Some stative verbs can also be dynamic, like, for example, verb be, think, have, see, and taste. Now, I just want to show a comparative table in order to make a summary of the difference between intransitive verbs and stative verbs. As you can see, the first one is that intransitive ones do not need to take objects to have sense. And in the case of the stative ones, they can take adjectives and noun phrases. A second difference is that intransitive ones are action verbs and can be conjugated in the progressive form, but not the stative ones, because they show just states such as sensory, measurement, possession, being, and cognitive state. To finish, you have a homework assignment as a way to practice what we have studied in this PowerPoint presentation. You will have to look for a very complete list of intransitive and stative verbs in internet. And then you will have to think about 10 different sentences using intransitive verbs and another 10 sentences using stative verbs. And now, we will watch a video about action verbs versus state verbs so that it can help you to work on your homework assignment. In case there still are any doubts about the topics. Pay attention to her explanation and take notes of the most important parts. Here you can see the link for the next video session. Take note of them so that you do not forget them. This is all for me. And with this slide, I finish my presentation. I hope that you can continue to be sound and safe in your houses in this time of COVID-19. Continue following the government and Ministry of Health advice. See you in the next video conference.